before we kind of get underway, we are really, really fortunate that the one, the only Philip Denny is here to talk to us about not just a big idea, but the big idea. Philip, take it away.
Can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay, so just want to start off with a quick story. There was once two students, and they were sitting in the back of Professor Ross's business ethics class up at the Haas School of Business. And the professor was talking about how you could grow organic mushrooms from recycled coffee grounds. So taking a waste stream and creating delicious, nutritious products from this. And something about that ignited the interest of these two students who didn't know each other. They walked up to the professor at the end of the class, started talking to him, and they began experimenting. They began growing mushrooms in his frat house, not the psychedelic kind, the real kind. And they began experimenting with this. When they actually were able to grow a pail of mushrooms, they took it down to Chez Panisse, to Alice Waters, who's a famous chef. She said, if you can make this happen, we'll blow you up. And the students were really excited, but they didn't know what to do next. We had another student. He was a bioengineering PhD student, and he loved spiders and the properties of spider silk because it's stronger than cotton, it's softer than steel.
Philip, can you go even slower?
Yeah. Softer than steel. It's more elastic than a rubber band. And he knew if you could harness these properties, you could create synthetic products, everything from Kevlar vests to high fashion retail apparel. So he pitched an idea to the Big Ideas contest. We gave him a little bit of funding, a little bit of support. And from that, he grew his company. But in both these cases, neither of the mushroom farmers or the Spider-Man, they didn't know where to start. But they came to Big Ideas. We gave them that structure. We gave them up to $20,000 in funding. We gave them support, and we helped incubate their ideas and get them off the ground. Fast forward to today, and those mushroom farmers now have Back to the Roots. It's a business here in Emeryville that employs over 100 people. They do about $1 million in sales and revenue per year. And they're one of the largest indoor home gardening companies in the world now. That Spider-Man I was telling you about, his company is the latest UC Berkeley unicorn. They're valued at more than $1.2 billion. They have a range of products with Adidas, with Stella McCartney, with Patagonia, and they're blowing up the world in a good way. So what I want to tell you is that Big Ideas is back. We just relaunched our contest yesterday. If you have an early stage idea, a student-led idea that focuses on making an impact on society, we want to help you. We can give you up to $20,000 in funding and support, mentorship, networks, and we also have a whole host of different workshops and speaker series that you can take advantage of. Our next speaker event is on September 28th, Catena Biosciences. So Marco Loba, the CEO of Catena Biosciences, they are harnessing, they have a protein conjugation method using the CRISPR-Cas9 technology that was invented here at Berkeley. And they are using that to actually retrain the immune system to create vaccines and therapies for autoimmune diseases. So pretty cool topic. We're going to be talking about that on September 28th. If you want to learn more about Big Ideas, go to bigideascontest.org or bigideascontest.org/events. If you just want to come in and talk to me about your idea, you can find me at bigideascontest.org/advising. And you can sign up on my Calendly account for a one-on-one advising appointment. But lots of resources, lots of opportunities for you to take that idea that might be in your head right now, get it out into an implementation strategy, and turn your big idea into impact. Thank you very much.
Philip, will you send us something so we can send it to the group?
Yeah.
And so it's next Wednesday, September, not tomorrow, but in a week.
Our first event is September 28th. And it's
28th.
28th in Blum Hall, which is on the north side, just north of here.
On Friday.
Yep, on Friday.
Any food?
On Wednesday. We will have pizza. Yeah, we always have pizza.
All right, then I messed up on my days, but is it?
I think it's Wednesday.
Okay.
September 28th.
Big Ideas, Philip Denny, pizza, Big Ideas, mushroom pizza.
We will have mushroom pizza.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So, but yeah, please come talk to me if you have any interest in the program, and we'd love to help you out.
Thanks. Thank you all. I missed seeing everybody last week. I hope it was interesting listening to Alberto Todescini talk about AI and possibilities and things that he knows about AI and what's happening in AI. Hope it was kind of fun to have a little bit of a different format. Today, we are so lucky to be back live again. And what's interesting, actually, I want to I just want you all to know how fast things go. Our speaker today is a Cal grad. I won't do much of an introduction because Marshall is here to do that. But I have Molten Energy up here, and I realize that it is not Molten Energy. It's already Molten Industries. So it's like moving really fast. So it's exciting. What's kind of cool, we listened to Dr. Ming about getting an idea. We heard from Alberto Todeschini about like what AI, what's out there, what could you possibly do. Today, our speaker is going to take us through a seed pitch, which he hasn't done in a while. So let's all be like not too VC-ish, but be really supportive. And then we have the opportunity to sit down, and I'd like it to be as interactive as possible. So think of questions while we'll be sitting up here. Get your questions ready, and we'll just make it super interactive, and Amy and Sukriti will follow up on that. Just in case, other than the smoke, before we start, and before I introduce our person who's going to introduce our speaker, any questions that you're dying to get off of your chest, that you're worried about, anything related to class, that'll prevent you from focusing tonight? That would be? No. There you go. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Marshall. Marshall, who is, as he told me, a super senior. Anybody know what a super senior is? Who else feels like they're a super senior? There you go. You are super senior. Marshall already has his business that he is starting. He's got a fascinating background. Well, I think it's fascinating. Rowing, singing, and econ. And he's here to introduce our speaker today. Marshall, thank you for joining. Marshall, that's not true. Armand Marshall. We're now starting a new thing, just calling people by their last name.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right, well, welcome students and staff. My name is Armand, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the newest member to our Newton Lecture Series, Mr. Caleb Boyd, the CTO and co-founder of Molten Industries. Molten Industries is a company dedicated to producing clean, energy-efficient, and climate-friendly hydrogen. This is done by an extraction process where they remove hydrogen from methane molecules without having CO2 as a byproduct. Instead, the byproduct of this process is a solid form of carbon that can be used in industrial scale applications such as concrete, paint, and plastics. Now, Molten Industries already has an impressive degree of public pedigree. They have been featured in publications such as Climate Tech VC, Axios, and the Wall Street Journal. And as for Caleb himself, he's certainly no slouch. In 2015, he graduated from the UC Berkeley with a dual degree in mechanical engineering and material sciences, before going to the second best school in the Bay Area, Stanford, where he got his PhD in material science engineering. In addition to both his academic excellence and background in climate tech, he also has both professional experiences in product design and venture capital. Now, as I stand here today, I'm absolutely excited that we get to meet with someone at the forefront of the renewable energy revolution. So with that being said, let's give a warm welcome for Mr. Caleb Boyd.
Amy, you're better at this than I am.
Right. Is this live?
Hold on.
Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me? I can just shout too. While we figure this out, we can talk about the name Molten Industries, not Molten Energy. The reason we called it Molten Industries, we were originally just going to call it Molten, but there's a company that makes basketballs, volleyballs, and all sorts of sports equipment named Molten. So that was out. And then we were thinking like molten.tech or molten.ai or something, but we don't do anything related to AI. And all of our customers are like, I don't want to use the word stodgy, but like pretty old, established, like steel plants, chemical plants. And so we thought industries would make a lot more sense and not be as, I don't know, molten.tech doesn't seem very appealing to a lot of steel plants and chemical plants. How do I need this?
Awkwardly, maybe for Caleb.
Oh, this is a good place to start, actually.
Oh, is it a good place to start?
Well, it could be. it's kind of a fun place to start. That was myself and my co-founder. We can talk about that later as well. Kevin, we met in grad school at Stanford and had a really fun time at a lot of. That one picture was at Stagecoach. We can talk about that later. But
should we all pretend like we're maybe interested in investing and somehow you've gotten our attention?
yeah, this is a good idea. So what I'm going to show you, and Vicky mentioned this, is kind of our pre-seed pitch deck. So this was myself and Kevin in late 2021. We had just been brainstorming about ideas for pretty much how to stop climate change for the last year and a half before this, so starting in the pandemic. And we were going out to pitch to a bunch of different VCs, and what those pitches looked like were all Zoom meetings, because it was kind of like still pandemic time, and that's really efficient to pitch on Zoom meetings. And so I'm just going to run you through what our pre-seed pitch was. And this was the first slide here. And we didn't have a logo at the time, so we just used Calibri font, like zoomed really, really big. So I'm Caleb. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Molten Industries. And our mission is to decarbonize heavy industry. And we think the best way to do that is with hydrogen. And so I'm going to talk to you today about clean hydrogen. Oh, and this clicker's not working. OK. But first, I want to share who our team is, what we're doing, and how we got to where we are today. So myself and my co-founder, Kevin Bush, we met spending late nights in the lab at Stanford. We did our PhDs studying renewable electricity, specifically high-efficiency solar cells. And my co-founder has actually founded a company before this called Swift Solar. And I worked in climate tech venture capital at a fund called UVC Partners as well. We've put together through the last 6 months, really, an amazing group of advisory board members, including people like Arun Majumdar, who was the former founder of ARPA-E, Richard Kaufman, the chair of Generate Capital, and then ex-co-founders and people who are experts in industrial and oil and gas and clean energy fields as well. Oh, I can't walk too far away from this. OK. So some of you guys might have heard about hydrogen already, and some of you guys might think about hydrogen as this futuristic clean fuel. I thought it was pretty funny what Philip was saying before this about blowing up the world, because when you talk about hydrogen, you don't want to mention blow up or fire. It's very bad. Hydrogen today, though, is actually already a $100 billion industry, and it's not used for futuristic fuels or energy or, I mean, it's a little bit of cars. But it's primarily used as a chemical feedstock. And it's used for fertilizer production. Over 50% of it is used for fertilizer production. So all of the food we eat, or almost all the food we eat, is made using ammonia-based fertilizer that's made with hydrogen. And it's also used for things like methanol and petroleum refining. Something that's interesting to note is that the hydrogen market today is almost twice as big as the lithium-ion battery market. So when you guys think lithium-ion batteries, really big deal, hydrogen today is already a really big deal in a lot of really heavy chemical industries. The problem is that hydrogen today is really, really dirty. It emits a lot of CO2. The way that we make hydrogen today is we take methane, which is CH4, we combine it with steam, and we create CO2 and hydrogen. This makes about a gigaton of CO2 per year, which is about 2% of global CO2 emissions, or about the emissions of Japan. So we want to stop this. Furthermore, beyond replacing what hydrogen is used for today, we want to enable this promise of a future clean industry where we can decarbonize things like cement, steel, long-haul shipping, cargo shipping, aviation. Hydrogen has the ability to change all of these sectors in really, really unique ways if you can make it clean and low cost. The problem is that today's carbon neutral hydrogen, or clean hydrogen, is expensive and energy intensive. And so what Molten Industries was founded to do was to solve this problem of making clean hydrogen that's both inexpensive and clean. So this is just an overview of the ways that we make hydrogen today. The one on the left, I already talked about, steam methane reforming. It's really, really cheap. That's good. That's why we use it. But it emits 10 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram of hydrogen. Water electrolysis you guys might have heard of or used before, maybe in your high school chemistry class. When you put 2 electrodes in a beaker of water and bubbles come off of them, you're splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. It's great because it doesn't emit any CO2. The problem is it's really, really energy intense. And so there's actually I was just talking to someone who runs a steel plant in Austria, and they said that if they decarbonize their steel plant using hydrogen made from water electrolysis, they would need all of the electricity production in Austria for their one steel plant. And so that's a problem, especially when you think about all the other things that need electricity today that we're putting onto the grid. So things like EVs, batteries, et cetera. So that's why we came to talk about this third method of hydrogen production, which is called methane pyrolysis. And Armand did a really good job of actually introducing this. Most people that I've talked to, even after explaining this to them, don't actually understand what this is. And Armand, you clearly understand what it is, so good job. Methane pyrolysis is kind of a mix of the two. So we're taking methane, or natural gas, which is used to produce hydrogen today, the dirty way. But instead of making CO2 with it, we crack it into hydrogen and solid carbon. And this is done using renewable electricity. And so this is a pathway that can be done with low energy intensity, and also with something that makes 0 or even negative CO2 emissions. And the interesting thing is also we create solid carbon. So solid carbon, you can think about as this like black powder. It comes in different forms. We can also make graphite, which can be used for batteries. And importantly, that's actually an asset, not a liability. So instead of creating CO2, which is a liability, you have to figure out what to do with it, it's a bad thing, we're creating a good thing, this solid carbon that we can sell. This is just an overview of our process. So we create clean hydrogen and valuable carbon from things like biomethane, natural gas, or renewable gas using renewable electricity. So the key and the core aspect of our innovation is all in that decomposition reactor in the middle of this slide, which is just an icon here because that's what we had at the time. No, we actually had a reactor running in our garage. But we run this decomposition reactor with renewable electricity, run it through a carbon separator, and out comes hydrogen gas and solid carbon. The interesting thing with this, so I mentioned we can use natural gas. Natural gas is a fossil fuel. And so what you can think about this as decarbonizing natural gas. So we're taking the carbon out of natural gas. Instead of emitting it as CO2, we're storing it as a solid. The interesting thing, if we use biomethane or renewable gas, and these are things that come from, think of dairy farms, wastewater treatment plants, or landfills. So at one point, we had the saying that we turn couch shit into jet fuel. Because if you take biomass or biomethane that comes from biomass like cow shit, and you run it through a reactor, you create carbon negative hydrogen and solid carbon. And that's effectively removing CO2 from the atmosphere, which is really, really interesting and kind of a transformational way to create hydrogen and do something that is removing CO2 from the atmosphere permanently. And so this is a picture of our system, which we had in late 2021. So Kevin and I, in Kevin's garage, built this reactor that you see here that actually got up to about 1200 Celsius, which is hot enough to melt iron, cast iron. And we put methane into it and produced hydrogen and carbon. And so this is kind of what we raised off of this idea that in our garage, in Kevin's backyard, we created a prototype that went up to above 1000 Celsius, created carbon black and hydrogen, and importantly did this continuously and without clogging, which I'll touch on later. We achieved really, really high hydrogen yields and showed that we could create both graphitic flakes and carbon black. Thankfully, our landlord was really lenient and let us do this in his backyard. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here today. But I'm gonna skip over this pretty briefly. But basically, our approach overcomes a lot of the shortcomings of prior methane pyrolysis approaches. So we didn't invent methane pyrolysis. It's been around since the early 1900s. We've read patents dating back to 1913. But we've overcome a lot of the issues that others have faced when looking at this approach. And so things like high energy efficiency, Importantly, avoiding carbon from clogging things. So this seems kind of simple, but a big problem with this is that when you split methane, you create this hydrogen gas and this solid carbon that just clogs up reactors. It's like your arteries clogging with cholesterol. It's really, really bad and things break. And we invented a way to prevent that from happening. And so that's the core of the technology and the core of what we raised off. And then over the next 10 years, we aim to become a major global producer of clean chemicals with over $1 billion in revenues by 2030. And today, and this was in 2021 today, we have a successful working prototype. We've fundamentally de-risked the tech. We filed patents and formed a company. And we're raising this pre-seed round to be able to build a mini pilot at 18 tons of hydrogen a year and secure LOIs for our pilot plant. We're going to build out an amazing team and then raise a seed round in 2023, 2024. We actually skipped that seed round thanks to government grant funding, which is another thing that I recommend you guys do. And we're going to build a 350-ton a year pilot plant in 2024, which will enable us to get to revenues of about $1 million a year, after which we're going to raise our Series A, and then build our first-of-a-kind commercial plant on site with a customer. Okay.
You know, it's sad when you can do the decarbonization but can't get the slide shift.
Yeah, you think, yeah, 2023, you know. And so we're looking for partners to help us scale. And again, think about this in 2021 timeframe. So over the next year, we aim to expand our team to 5 people, secure customer relationships and nail down our go-to-market, and then raise a seed round in Q4 2022 or Q1 2023. So that's the investor pitch. Thank you, guys.
I think you alluded to this, but what happened after this investor pitch, especially on Zoom?
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of no's. That is something that you guys, if you guys are looking to go out and raise, will probably see. We also had a lot of yeses. And so most VCs will do some sort of screening process where they'll try to do like really, really quick pitches like this. That's like a 30-minute call. And then they'll either do an in-person visit or try to dive in on a longer call where they're going to try to understand your competition, your market, who you are as a team, understand things about your technology. And so that just kicks off a series of meetings that lasted for, at the time, this was actually really quick because this was late 2021 and the VC market was still really, really hot. So we raised in about a month. It could take longer than that today. Also, pre-seed rounds and seed rounds, you can usually raise much more quickly than like a Series A or a Series B or something like that, where it could take up to 6 months to a year to raise. Yeah.
Would you join me?
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm going to actually pull this. Will you help me on the other side? We'll just do it all ourselves. Here we go. Water for you, and we believe that chair will work, whichever one you feel comfortable sitting in. Amy, can I ask you a huge favor?
Yes.
Or Amy, can you switch the computer, and then I will. We'll have some pictures there later on. So I love the fact that you were willing to do this pre-seed. Has anybody seen? I mean, I'm just curious. How many of you all have seen a lot of investor pitches? 4 or 5 of you. Anybody notice anything interesting? I noticed some things, but anybody notice anything that you're willing to say about the pitch that you thought was interesting? Anything different?
Or just feedback.
Yeah, can you all, right here is. Yeah.
Yeah. So the comment was like, didn't share much about how the reactor actually works, which is somewhat, for multiple reasons, you mentioned this. One is that you can really dive into tech, and some of you guys might have already glazed over with the amount that we are already diving into tech here. Most investors that you talk to are generalists. They're not going to be experts in your field. And so if you dive too deep into something, their eyes are just going to kind of glaze over and they'll be like, don't know what you're talking about. So that was the first thing. And we did, like in these later stages, once investors were interested, dive into the tech. And then the second thing is like, you never want to give away like all your secrets. So we are very careful with, and there's much more than what was in this deck that we share with all of our investors, but you really want to be careful with like binning your company IP into maybe like what you or only your company knows. Maybe what your investors know is maybe another outside ring there. And then what you share in something that's like a kind of just met someone pitch like this is probably like considered to be, I mean, this slide deck is basically, the majority of it would be public almost. Yeah.
Anything else anybody noticed? Sorry, the makeshift table here. Anything else? Yeah.
It was just very much like a story. It had the beginning, it had the what it is, comparisons in the future, just like very succinct. So yeah, I guess that's why it would appeal to someone that also doesn't have that background knowledge that you do or your co-founder does.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Yeah.
I guess like what your partnership model is, who you're working with, and why they would pay you to do what you do.
Yeah, like business model is kind of missing there. Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people ask us about. And yeah, it's good to leave, sometimes it's good to leave some things out because you kind of encourage the questions and then you have backup slides for that. Yeah.
Did you all hear that? It's good to leave some things out to encourage questions. I think it's we're always looking for little tips or tricks, and I think that's a big one. Yeah. And you have backup slides on that. The question was, it was about what the business model is. Yeah, I see there are other hands up. Yeah.
I guess you didn't mention specifics about the technology, but the thing I noticed is that you were projecting that you can scale, but a lot of the times that you can do something on your lab bench, but it's insanely hard to actually scale to. I guess I talk more about batteries like gigawatt hours or megatons or something like that.
Yeah, it is super hard, and so that's like, I mean, the last 2 years for us have been in the trenches trying to make this scale, and there's definitely been setbacks, and we've made a ton of progress as well. And I think a lot of that's what it's about, is like sharing a vision and saying this is going to be really, really difficult, but if it pans out, it's going to be worth it. And then trying to find investors who are willing to take that on.
I noticed that when you were talking about competitors, it was largely about the different technologies that you're competing with and not necessarily different companies that you might be competing with in that industry.
Yeah. That's probably more a function of our environment and our industry than in general, I would say. Like, methane pyrolysis is not a very widely commercialized technology, and there's not like a dominant player in the field. So it doesn't make sense to talk about a bunch of like small companies as much as it makes sense to talk about different approaches. But if you were doing something that was like a Google competitor, I mean, I guess I would talk about Google.
Yeah.
This is a little less about the pitch, but I was kind of wondering, for the solid CO2 that you make, if there's anything that could happen to it that would end up releasing it as gas?
Yes. So I mean, it's solid
Can you
carbon.
repeat that? For the solid CO2, is there anything?
Anything that, like, if something happened to it, would end up releasing it all as gas?
Yeah. So like, basically, how do you make sure that the carbon that we take out of methane or natural gas is actually sequestered and doesn't just wind up back in the atmosphere? And obviously, if we took all that solid carbon, which is like this black powder, these graphite flakes, you can think about it like pencil lead is graphite. So we're basically making pencil lead. If you burn that, it would all be back in the atmosphere. And so a lot of what we've been thinking about are what are applications we can put that into where it's not released back to the atmosphere. So things like concrete. You can use this carbon as a cementitious replacement, put it into concrete, and it sticks in that concrete for a very, very long time. And we've even talked to people about just reverse coal mining. So like, what if we just take all that carbon, and instead of having people like dig carbon out of the ground, we just pay them to bury carbon underground and make hydrogen in the process. So.
I'm wondering if we could go back just a little bit on that deck.
Yeah.
I especially like those charts where it shows where you're different from anybody else, where everybody was having an issue in one of those five, I think one of the 5 areas, but you all had mastered that. So I always think it's a helpful thing to have in a deck. And you also had a very clear ask at the end and an expectation of what you were planning to do. Who helped you all come up with that, just that deck? How did you, it's so, it seems so simple, so elegant.
Well, we got a lot of feedback, tested it with my wife, tested it. I actually had a friend who worked at McKinsey who helped me make some of the slides. Like, consultants are great at making slides, so that's a good tip. I mean, I worked in venture capital, so I had seen, it's like, the year before I did this, I was looking at like 100 decks a week. So I think that helped as well. But getting a lot of feedback from family and friends and people who are like in the space but maybe not directly know about the space. Because most VCs, like I said, are generalists. So if you can explain it to someone who's not in your field and they understand what's going on, then that's a good sign.
We kind of know where you are now, or maybe I should say 2 years ago. Can you take us back when you said you had a class here. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience at Cal was like and how it kind of led up to Molten Industries? Industries does sound pretty cool, by the way.
Yeah, maybe we'll get big enough, we'll be just Molten someday. But until then, it's moltenindustries.com. Yeah, I mean, my experience at Cal was great. Honestly, I really got into the idea of entrepreneurship at Cal. I took a class that was similar to this, a little different. It was, I want to say it was called ME 110. It was like product design or product management. And it was one of those classes where you form a team and then try to create a product and then you pitch it to a group of like professors at the end of the class. I was telling this to Armand. We made like a mobile shopping app that was like Tinder, but for shopping. So the idea was like to swipe between like clothes that you liked or didn't like or something, and then it would like learn your preferences or something. That's where I really got into entrepreneurship. And I honestly didn't think I was gonna, so I ended up going to grad school. I didn't think I was gonna do grad school. I thought I was gonna go like work for a company or start a company. But then really enjoyed material science as well. So I was like trying to balance this. I enjoy this idea of entrepreneurship, but I'm also like really nerdy and love material science. And so I ended up pursuing that material science passion for a little bit more and going to Stanford to do that. Yeah.
But before you went to Stanford, you were at Apple and you were also in India, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those foreign places?
Apple, very foreign. I took a semester off to work at Apple. That was a great decision. If you guys have the opportunity to like take a semester off, at first, so I did that because Apple would not let me do just a summer. And I don't know if they still do that, but when I got the offer from Apple for an internship, I was like, I'd prefer to just do the summer. And they were like, no, you have to either do the semester or nothing. But it was completely worth it. And part of this, and I was gonna say this, Professor Howell asked, like, what are some things that I wish I had known during my time as an undergrad? And one of them is like reframing your perspective of choosing to do things rather than having to do things. And so when you think about like classes or homework, of like feeling like, man, pretty privileged to be in one of the best universities in the world, able to take these classes. And I think Apple helped me, or like going to Apple and getting into like this kind of like working world for 9 months, and then coming back and being able to look at classes and be like, okay, which classes do I actually want to take? Or why am I actually here to learn? And being able to enjoy that with a fresh set of eyes was really, really helpful. Because I think that can get a little bit lost. I mean, I remember when I was sitting in your guys' shoes, some of you guys might have taken time off, but I had just been like in school since I was 4 years old. So that's like all I knew was school. And I was getting kind of tired of it. So, yeah.
I just encourage you all, if you have questions that come up, feel free, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I have a question regarding the engineering. So how were you able to do like a 30-second pitch to VCs when like they might have not known what they were what you were talking about? Like how do you make it simple enough to reach your point across?
Yeah, I think get a lot of feedback. I think ask for active feedback as well was really helpful. So a lot of times we would stop, and I didn't do this, I could have done this, I guess, today, but there's just a lot of you guys. But usually when we were doing pitches too, stop after like 5 slides in and just be like, are you tracking? Or are there any questions? Or is there anything that you don't understand right now? Because that is something that you could just like run through a 20 minutes of slides or whatever, and then the person is stuck at slide 1 or something.
I think that's a good question. One thing I guess I should come clean on, speaking of clean energy, Caleb just happens to be incredibly personable, and we met because last March there was a Catalyst, Insik Ree, who's one of our board members at the Satarja Center, had recommended that you talk at ICLOC's Catalyst series, and we did speak, but I realized when we were on a Zoom call that you looked super familiar, and that's because oddly, painful as this is for any number of reasons, we met at a toga party at PICA. I was there for somebody's 40th birthday. It was like doing something later, but it occurred to me that we had probably met. And I think you were also, were you president or social chair? Or?
I was, yeah.
You were social chair?
Yeah.
You've done a lot of stuff in terms of like making things sound easier. It helps when you practice talking to a lot of people. So you were social chair at the fraternity. You also started the Hyperloop initiative. You were doing CRU. You also sing. You've just done all sorts of different activities where you're constantly interacting with different types of people. You weren't just in the lab.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So I think that also helps, by the way, like get comfortable. So the more cross diversity and activities, I think the easier it makes it. Was there anything?
I still get nervous. Like I'm still nervous right now, and so yeah.
It's actually, yeah. What do you do? I'm just curious. What helps with nerves for you?
Breathing.
Breathing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Don't stop breathing. Yeah.
So I know that you talked about pursuing like material science and entrepreneurship as like kind of 2 separate tracks. Do you think that your PhD kind of helped you lead into like that CTO position at a company? Or I know you mentioned your co-founder.
Yeah.
Just your technical experience during your PhD, did that help you?
The PhD helped a lot. And that is pretty specific potentially to like the field that we're working in, but a lot of my PhD was hands-on building equipment. And I had a little bit of experience of that in undergrad, but I didn't have a ton of it, of dealing with like pumps and compressors and inert, containment vessels and high pressure gases. All of that I dealt with in my PhD. That's like really specific to what I'm doing. Beyond that, the PhD was helpful for just building my network. So I had like the Berkeley network, then able to build the Stanford network, I think was really powerful as well, and having both of those helped. Yeah, I don't think a PhD is for everyone though. So I went to Stanford thinking I was just gonna do the master's and drop out. I applied to the PhD program because the PhD program was paid for, and the master's program I would have had to pay for myself. And then my advisor convinced me to stay, and I talked to a lot of different alumni as well. But I have a lot of friends who either dropped out of the PhD program, and I think that was the really right decision for them, or stayed with the PhD program, and I think that was potentially the wrong decision for them. So yeah, it's a super case by case. Happy to chat about that if you have like specific questions there.
And I also have another question. I saw that you're a Breakthrough Energy Fellow. What is
Yeah. So we have quite a few government grants now. Actually,
Want me to go?
I don't have my thing plugged in anymore. But I had another slide that was kind of like our team today, because we're now like 6 people. We have grants from the Department of Energy
Here?
and the National
Any
Science
of these?
Foundation. Oh, this is a fun one too. I was actually going to go back.
Tell me where. Should I keep going?
This was us in the garage. This is our team now.
Okay. Is that helpful?
Which is pretty fun. Yeah, just leave that up there.
Yeah.
And government grants and like the Breakthrough Energy Fellows application is more of a long form, we wrote like 20 pages and talk about the tech and everything. There's a lot of things that are similar, but in general, the grants more focus on the tech. And in VC, they focus more on the money.
Behind.
Okay, so I'm wondering, you said that this method, more or less a similar method of getting hydrogen, has been around for a long time. There's like a lot of different versions of it have been around, and they have their issues and all of that. So I wonder, what do you say? How come you two in your garage managed to figure this out? I mean, hydrogen is, as you said, a huge industry. There's a lot of people who want to do it. How did you do it?
Yeah, like what's the why now?
Yeah. Why now and why?
Why you?
Why you? Why you in your garage?
That's a really good VC question. Every VC asks that. So there's a couple things for the why now, and one is that this process doesn't really make sense if you don't care about CO2 emissions, because the way to do this with CO2 emissions is just way simpler. So it makes sense to do it with CO2 emissions. The other thing is that renewable electricity, so to power this with renewable electricity, has really only become viable in like the last 10 years or so. So we're finally getting to the point where renewable electricity is cheap enough where this can start to work. And then like the why us, I think that's just what it takes sometimes, is like 2 people in their garage trying to figure stuff out. And this is something that Kevin has actually taught me, my co-founder, because he's one of those people who's like kind of the Elon Musk type who take everything back to their first principles. And like anytime you say something to him, he's like, well, this like physics equation doesn't vibe with that. And I think it's important to remember that pretty much every big thing in the world was just come up with by someone like you and me. And I think another thing to think about is that for the first time in the world and kind of in history, we have access to like so much information and knowledge and people connections where you can like read all the research papers on a topic. You can reach out through LinkedIn or Twitter to like all the world experts in a topic and become an expert in something in like 6 months to a year, where maybe like, let's say 10 or 20 years ago even, that would have taken, years and years and years and years of work, which I think is a pretty exciting time that we live in.
Is this Kevin?
This is Kevin, yeah.
So how, Kevin was coming from Vanderbilt. I don't know where he grew up. I don't know how you all actually were in class together. Any story there?
So we spent lots of late nights in the lab, which is actually this. This is this last one. We did our PhDs together in the same lab group. So that's Kevin taking the selfie. That's me. That's a Cal shirt, actually. So go Bears. Building solar cells late at night. That's us at Stagecoach. So we were friends long before we were co-founders, and we just respected each other and thought that we really enjoyed bouncing ideas off of each other.
What's Stagecoach?
Stagecoach is like country music festival.
Oh.
Or like country music. Sorry.
Does everybody know that? I thought it was some like South by Southwest. Kind of, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Where is Stagecoach?
It's in Coachella or Indio, so like Southern California. Yeah.
So has anybody ever gone to Stagecoach? There you go. 2 of you. There you go. So you just kind of did these late nights in the lab, or no, you just got to be friends through classes?
Through our PhD group, our lab group. So he was actually a year ahead of me in the PhD, but we're in the same lab together, so we would build solar cells together all the time.
Did he, so are you all similar, different?
We're similar in a lot of ways. We're also different in several key ways. So Kevin is very much an ideator and like a creator. He likes to start things. I'm very much a refiner and a finisher. I like to finish things. That actually builds a lot of tension because Kevin is always starting things and then like leaving them everywhere. And I'm like trying to like clean up after him. But it's also really, really good in a founder relationship because you always need someone who's like, anytime you're founding a company, if you're not like pushing at it, no one will. And so if you're not creating things to do or creating problems, nothing's gonna happen. And so it's good to have that person who's like really, really creative and making all these things. And it's also good to have someone who can like refine that down, so.
When you have a disagreement about something, when he's leaving all this stuff all over, I feel like I'm talking about it. But it is almost like a marriage, by the way,
Yeah.
you know, a founding team. How do you all get through it? How do you all discuss things?
We're pretty direct, which is helpful. We do this, so we had a leadership coach, actually.
A marriage counselor?
Who was basically a therapist. Yeah, it was actually really helpful.
You're not the first, by the way, or the last?
Yeah, highly recommend therapy and leadership coaches. But she actually had us just start doing these meetups where we do dinners like once every other week, which is kind of crazy because we spend almost every day, all day together. But we do these meetups pretty intentionally of like, we're gonna have drinks or dinner. We call them brainstorming happy hours, and we just brainstorm about random stuff, which is how we started the company to start with. We would just have these calls. I was actually living in Germany. Kevin was living in the States. We would have these 3-hour calls, my 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., his 9 p.m. to midnight. I'm a morning person, he's a night person. And we would just talk about random stuff like methane pyrolysis, carbon sequestration, clean cement, clean hydrogen, batteries. We talked about like using like weather balloons to catch methane out of the sky. Talked about things like drilling the ice cores to like try to make ice caps float to reduce sea level rise, all this weird stuff. Like really crazy things. And that's what we enjoyed, and that's what got our relationship started. And so we do that every other week as like kind of a founder date night. And then have that space to talk about things of like, how's it going? How are you doing? Like, are you stressed out right now? What's stressing you out right now? And that's super helpful and valuable.
I think that's really interesting. When in those conversations, what was Kevin doing, by the way? He was still here?
Yeah, building stuff in the garage, yeah.
He wasn't working somewhere?
Oh yeah, we were both working. Kevin was the co-founder of another startup, and I was doing venture capital, yeah.
Did you ask permission to build the stuff in the garage?
Yes.
That's fine. You don't have to answer.
No, we definitely asked permission, and the landlord came around a lot and gave us like all sorts of tips. He's a really cool guy. We're still friends with him.
Huh.
We gave him and his husband like an amazing trip to Napa as a huge thank you when we moved out. And yeah, so.
Have they invested?
No.
Just curious, not yet. I think maybe the answer is not yet. So here you all are brainstorming. When did you say, like, okay, we're actually going to quit our jobs that are paying us, or maybe you didn't, and start? Like, when did that happen? When did that moment crystallize?
Yeah. So this reactor that we raised off of was kind of the V3, and so we had done a V1 and a V2 that both kind of worked but didn't really work. And so this one, first of all, the reactor started working. So we had this minimum viable prototype that was at least working. And then we had spent a lot of time talking to people who were experts in methane pyrolysis. So I talked about this kind of, you have LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can actually reach out to all these people who are experts. And so we talked to this one guy who had started pretty much the largest company in the methane pyrolysis for clean hydrogen space, and he had left it. And we had a conversation with him. We're like, this is what we're doing. This is the idea. Do you think it's a good idea, or is this really dumb? And he was like, this is really cool. You should patent this immediately. And that's when we decided to go full time.
So some people talk about not patenting. did you patent? Have you started the process?
Yeah, we've filed for a lot of patents. You have to be careful at what you patent and what you don't patent. So patents are not great protection for your IP. Like the best protection is trade secrets, because then no one knows what you're doing. And I think that's really important.
So what is a trade secret versus a patent? Can you?
Yeah, so a trade secret is something that basically your company decides to keep it a secret and not tell anyone. A perfect example is the Coca-Cola recipe. So the recipe for Coca-Cola is not public. No one knows it. It's not patented. It's a trade secret. A patent is something that it's a actual filing that you do with the government that shares specific information to the world publicly. And in exchange for sharing that information, the government gives you a protection or a right to use that exclusively for the next 17 to 20 years, depending on how you look at like where the times start and stop.
That's helpful, I think. So here you are, you got your idea, you're starting to talk to some people, they say it's a good idea. What happens next?
We had made the company before. I was just talking with our mom saying he's going through the company filing thing. So we used Clerky. You can also use Stripe. There's a couple different things out there to make an actual corporation. We raised, so we made this pitch deck, started talking to investors, raised.
How did you come up with the name?
That took us a long time. We just brainstormed for like a whole weekend, wrote down a bunch of different names. We were like looking at different languages and like trying to be really clever with things. And then we were just like, wow, this reactor is really, really hot, so we're gonna call it Molten. That's it.
We have a lot of people who speak a lot of different languages. Oh, I see you have a question, but I am curious, does Molten work in different languages?
I don't know. If anyone speaks a language where Molten really doesn't work, please tell me.
Two questions up here. There's a woman who has a question. We'll have, or can you go first and then?
Yeah, so you come from a pretty technical background as in PhD, but when did the business skills come in or were they just like acquired on the way?
Yeah, I'm still acquiring them or trying to. I'm reading like a lot of books and trying to get mentored from people who are like a year ahead of me or 2 years ahead of me. And how do I manage a team? How do I be a CTO? Like what are important things for, a big thing we're thinking about right now, for example, is like contracts. Like when we're looking at talking to potential customers, like industrial gas contracts. How do you write up these contracts for if the natural gas price changes, electricity price changes, if I'm building the plant on their land, a little bit of it was at the venture capital fund. So doing VC helped. And then taking classes, honestly, classes like this. So I took classes at Berkeley that were like cross-listed engineering and business. I did the same thing at Stanford where I took a couple different like business school classes. And that just helped a ton.
Thank you for your patience back there. And then we'll.
Yeah, so like we have no doubts that hydrogen is like one of the most important sources for clean energy. And you made like a good move in order to basically pursue your company or your startup with like dealing with clean hydrogen or clean energy, sorry. My question is like, it has its own challenges too. What were your thoughts with respect to the challenges associated with hydrogen, like mainly hydrogen transportation, for example, hydrogen embrittlement and so on?
Yeah.
I mean, you can answer this probably because you're like you have a material science background too.
No, yeah. Hydrogen is really hard to transport and store. It's super light. It likes to escape from everything. And so that's actually something that we thought was really important in guiding our thesis for the company. So not only if you're using methane do you use less energy and you can create this clean carbon byproduct, but you can also use existing transportation networks for methane or natural gas that go to pretty much like every building in the United States. And so you can produce hydrogen on site right where it's consumed instead of having to produce it centrally at a big plant and then pipe it or truck it or ship it around to different places. And so you can use methane as the energy carrier and then produce hydrogen at the point of use.
I'm just wondering, so your guys' production of hydrogen is more affordable and I guess more efficient than others. But so how are there no other like big companies already doing, similar things or even, better?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. That's also that's another like VC question. So it's a technical challenge. So doing methane pyrolysis is really, really difficult technically for several reasons. One, it's at really, really high temperatures. So you're doing this at temperatures that are hot enough to melt steel. So your materials of construction and what you're actually going to do this in is pretty difficult. And that's another why now answer to that other question. We've made so many advancements in the last 20 years on really, really advanced high temperature structural materials that we're able to benefit off of. And so I think that's a big reason of like why haven't other companies done this. And a lot of other companies are looking at it. So like Shell, Chevron, Exxon, BASF, all those companies have kind of like divisions that are looking at methane pyrolysis right now.
So why would they invest, when they have those resources and your guys' company on a smaller scale, why would people for your guys' company?
Because we think we can make the tech work before they can.
First in.
Yeah.
Come on, this side of the room.
I have a
Yeah.
question. So I know you kind of touched on this, and you said that your like interests lied in material science, engineering, and entrepreneurship. But like, what specifically made you pick like this is the problem that I want to combat? This is like what I want to come up with a solution for. Like, what was the thought process, or what was like the decision that you wanted to think about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's that's just a really good thing. I've been reading this book called Essentialism by this guy named Greg McKeown, and it all talks about this idea of like, if you don't prioritize your time, someone else will. And if you don't choose like what you want to work on, then what you work on is going to get chosen by someone else, basically. And so that was like in the pandemic, basically, Kevin and I started having these calls of like, let's brainstorm around ideas for clean tech. And the reason for clean tech is several-fold. So this is another important point here, is that I think it helps to have some sort of North Star of like, what do you want to do with your life, or what do you think is important, and use that to guide a lot of decisions that you make as you go down the founding route, or maybe the not founding route, or whatever it's going to be. For me, that North Star is my relationship with God, and I think that for me, it's like my life centers around honor God, and then love others. And I see the climate crisis as being like one of the biggest problems of humanity right now. And I think it's honestly going to impact so many people. And the best way to help people right now is to work on climate. And so that's kind of what we started with. And then we took this approach of, let's put ourselves 10 years in the future. What do we think are the things that are not going to be solved with respect to climate 10 years from now? And we saw things like, so we had just done a bunch of work on solar for our whole PhDs. And we looked at like batteries and energy storage and wind. And we kind of thought that those were going to be solved problems in 10 years. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to go into that over the next 10 years. But we just said, let's assume that the entire grid is run on renewable carbon zero electricity. And like nuclear works, and solar and wind is just scaled like crazy. What are still going to be the issues that are around? And that's where we started looking into these ideas of like cement, steel, petrochemicals, all the things that don't have easy solutions that you can just electrify or like use a battery or a solar panel to power. And then we dove into each of those sectors, and we looked a bunch at, how do you make clean steel? How do you make clean cement? We started Molten actually on a patent for clean cement that after like working on for about a year didn't work. We were like, this is not going to work. And so we ditched that and started looking into hydrogen. And we saw hydrogen as being something that really ran through a lot of those different sectors. So you can make clean steel with hydrogen. You can replace coal in steel making. You You can even put hydrogen into cement kilns and use that as part of the cement making process. And then when you think of like plastics or chemicals, all of these, this is gonna be kind of like big picture again, but when you think about any like plastic or fuel that we use today as a hydrocarbon, meaning that it's made up of hydrogen and carbon atoms bonded together. The way that we get that today is from oil and gas. You can think about a future where we get all of the carbon in the hydrocarbons from CO2 from the sky. So we're capturing all the carbon from CO2, and then all the hydrogen we're making renewably. And so we said the big question is like, where is that hydrogen going to come from?
I wanted to actually flip through this deck because I wanted to go back to your initial goal that I think you have on the first page, if I can do this, of your deck. So I've spent a little bit of time talking about Tesla. Let's see if I can do this the right way. Am I going the right way? Yeah. Mark Tarpenning and Martin Eberhard started with the goal to stop reliance on oil. But they did it with something very, very specific. And in a way, I mean, it's a pretty audacious goal to do that, or put a rocket on Mars, whatever happens to be the goal. But you have very specific ways of doing it. And what you all have up here was your goal, creating low-cost clean hydrogen to decarbonize heavy industry. I'm so excited by the word that you used that now I can't remember. What's the process called again?
Methane pyrolysis.
Methane pyrolysis. Come on, you all. If we can't use that at a gathering, that'll be too bad. But using methane pyrolysis for this, it's such a very focused, specific thing. And I'm just wondering, from the time you started with this and to where things are now, can you just tell us some of the things that have happened on the way? What you discarded? You talked a little bit about that, but where are you now?
Yeah, so now we're based out of Oakland, California. We've got a 10,000 square foot facility there with 6 of us. We're building out a pilot plant. So you kind of saw the hockey stick curve. We're still on the very zoomed in front portion, very small on the curve. We're looking to raise a Series A next year, probably late next year. And then we're starting to plan out what our first of a kind commercial plant would look like for 2025. That will probably be somewhere in the Midwest or Texas, because building things in California is fairly difficult. But yeah.
It's kind of incredible. Nothing is ever like this. It's such a nice clean swoop. What are any key inflection points when you're we can't go on?
Yeah. Basically really bad times.
Anything you can share?
Yes. So I mentioned how we, well, first of all, we did this cement thing, and we were we're going to start a company based on cement. Thankfully, we didn't go full time on that company because that would have been a bad idea. And then we were this is a terrible idea. We're going to pivot and do something else. So we started this hydrogen company, and we thought, we've got it. We've built this reactor in a garage. Works great at this really tiny scale. And we're filing patents, and we raised, and we went full time. And about 3 months after that, we were wow, this actually is not going to work. And so we're still doing methane pyrolysis, but we pivoted our tech from that original reactor that we had running in the garage to something that was much more scalable. Because as we started scaling that reactor from the garage, it was this is not going to scale the 100,000 times that it needs to. And literally what we were doing in the garage needed to scale up 100,000 times bigger. And so I think that was a really, really nail-biting time, because I had just moved with my wife back to the States, went full-time on this. We had raised funding from a bunch of investors and made all these promises to them. We had hired people, and then all of a sudden we were wow, this is actually not really working the way we thought it was going to work. And so that was super stressful. And we went back to the drawing board and said, are there ways that we can still achieve what we want to achieve, but in a different manner, using what we've learned and what we've built already? And that is a problem that I think is universal to startups. So many people that I've talked to get to the point where they're like, we need to pivot, we need to do something else. This original idea that we thought we had going isn't going as well as we thought. But a lot of people say that startups' success is not really determined by like how smart the founders are or whatever, but it's basically determined on like how persistent you are and how long you can survive. And that's like persistence and ability to raise money. And so being good at both of those things helps a lot.
Matcha, I don't know if, I know you'll stay for a few minutes for questions, but instead of ending on this note, or does someone have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going based off like the previous question, so obviously like.
Can you just hard
yeah,
to hear.
Going based off like the previous question, so like building your product, like building the like reactor, everything. There's a grind to that. Like the grind of startup life is like very, very challenging. So I guess how did you like mediate like I guess not going insane? Like how did you like?
Yeah.
Oh that. Right.
Yeah, sleep is important. I highly recommend sleep. I mean, so my wife keeps me really grounded, which is nice. She like tells me to knock it off and like take a weekend off all the time. We don't work like insane hours. I tend to think that most people who talk about working a lot, except for maybe Elon Musk, because he's actually crazy, but most people overinflate what they work. And we like, I probably work 60 hours a week, maybe 70 hours on a crazy week. But if you think about it, that's like, I can squeeze that into 5 work days and still take my weekends off. And I think a lot of people work that at like Apple and Google or stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be too crazy. And I think really prioritizing and choosing like what are the things that actually need to get done versus the things that don't really need to get done is really important.
We'll do one more question, then we'll close. Oh, well, am I missing? What is one question? 1, 2.
Okay, quick question, just on your team and getting to the point where you have the, I guess, opportunity to have a team and kind of build one. What was the kind of that criteria or like evaluation process where you were looking for people and what kind of like made you pull the trigger on a certain individual?
Yeah, there's a really good book for this called Who, just WHO, Who. It outlines kind of the hiring process that we use, and a lot of startups that we know use that same hiring process. But you basically have to really think that someone is like a rock star, especially super early on in your company. And maybe rock star is the wrong word, but because sometimes people are different than rock stars, they don't need to be like a rock star. And the reason for that is those early hires like determine so much of your company in the cultural fit and the performance of whether you're going to do well or not. So if Kevin and I had this kind of long hiring process where we do like initial interview, then we do an in-depth interview where we talk like about the person's entire past pretty much, professional past. And then we do a super in-depth technical interview. And then we'd actually invite people to work with us for, one person we actually had work with us on a contractor basis for a month before we actually hired them full time. Most people we did kind of 2 to 4 days of working with us, because a lot of times it's hard to tell how you actually work with someone until you're literally just doing a project together. And so that's the best tip I can give, is like actually work with them before you hire them. Yeah. And we paid them for that. I mean, we paid them as like consultants and contractors for that time.
Yeah, I guess on the paid part too, I'm assuming it's mostly like an equity type of deal.
So we pay cash and equity. We gave each of our employees kind of 3 different tiers, and they could choose to have more cash or more equity, because I think that people are in different situations, and sometimes people need like more of a paycheck depending on their family or whatever. I think it's important to like not pay people terrible wages. This is something also that I would give you guys like important tip here. I had friends, especially like who were after Berkeley or after Stanford, went and worked at startups, and I think got kind of taken advantage of, and like worked at a place for years and like made like extremely low salary with kind of all these promises and worked super hard, and then it came to nothing. So I guess don't do that, yeah.
Over here is a, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned that you made promises to venture capitalists before. And so I was wondering, like, did you make those promises or did they ask you to make the promise to them?
So I think, yeah, with VCs, I use promises as kind of like the promise of a certain future, because we are very open and honest with our venture capitalists and all of our investors of like, you know, this is what we know, this is what we want to accomplish, these are the risks in that process, and this is like the promising future that we think we can have. And so I think, I mean, the main promises that you have when you're working with someone else's money is that you're just gonna, you know, take care of it, spend it wisely on the thing that's best for the company and best for them. But that's still stressful when you're using someone else's money, so.
I just think this is a good place to probably end, because we're getting to the end of our half hour, whatever, 6:30. But your transparency and talking about everything, and when you all are thinking about values as a leader or a founder, I would just say right here, humility and your clarity of vision and your caring, plus a cool company. I just want to thank you very, very much for spending time. And give you a hand. I'll go ahead and post. We have a link that we use. Let's see if I can whip through this really quickly. I apologize. But our link, and we'll give you feedback also. And I think if you all have questions, you can ask Caleb a little bit up front. Thank you all very much. Let's see if I can do this. I think I called it something clever like Molten E, but I know I've had some issues with capitalization, so let's make sure I do this the right way. There we go, Molten E. Thank you very much, Caleb.
Yeah, thank you.
That was awesome.